This past week, I sat with a group and we discussed the text for today, going in depth, wrestling with words and places, the understanding of widows and those who were longing to see new life. We talked about Jesus entering into the picture. And over and over and over again, we went here, up to our head, wanting to parse words and think about what this all meant theologically. And then, as if in a moment of inspiration, I turned to one of my colleagues and friends and said, "You are the one who lost your son a year ago. When you hear these texts, what does it do for you?" He got a tear in his eye. And he said, "What I cling to in these texts is that I will see my son again. Whether it is now or into the future, what I know is that there is a promise that God continues to accompany me in the midst of my sadness, in the midst of my loss. And I put my trust in a resurrection that is yet to come, that one day again I will see and live in this wonderful promise of being with John." In that moment, after he had finished speaking, we were silent. And after that long, pregnant pause, things started happening. All of a sudden, conversation erupted about an individual in a congregation living with terminal pancreatic cancer. Conversation opened up about couples longing to have a child, wrestling with infertility. We talked about those who have experienced a stroke. We talked about what it means for congregations to struggle with new life. What it means to be in a culture in which there is so much fear being thrown around politically and socially. And all of a sudden, the conversation about parsing words and thinking theologically went right here. As we come into this Sunday and into these texts, with this wonderful image about the widow of Zarephath and then the widow of Nain, we are invited into that place of being moved out of our heads and dwelling richly in our hearts, allowing them to be broken open to the pain around us, allowing ourselves to find that moment, that place in which God's promise continues to speak to us. I want us to think a little bit about this gospel reading. Throughout text, the gate is the place where people go to be community. It's where you go to share the announcements of what is happening. Some might say you even go there to gossip a little bit. You go there for business transactions, to make sure that business gets done, that you hear what the person over there is selling and what you might have to sell and how you can make the exchange. And today, as we come to this text, we are told that at the gate, two processions meet. There is the procession of this funeral bier. Imagine the people carrying on sticks this young man who has died, with the people trailing along, wailing. And back in that day, oftentimes there were even paid mourners to cry out, to wail loudly, to let them know how much this one would be missed. They are walking him out of the city to the place of burial, the place of decomposition. And there at the gate, another procession is coming in. It is a procession of people who have been following Jesus. They have seen what has been happening around him as he has touched and welcomed people into their community, as he has blessed children, as he has offered healing and hope, as he has taught, as he has shared bread with those on the margins. And as they are coming in, they are filled with hope. They are filled with the promise of God in their lives as they look to this one among them, Jesus, the anointed, the rabbi, this crazy man from Nazareth who is doing a new thing. And all of a sudden, this procession of despair and this procession of hope intersect. Imagine how often in our lives that happens. When we are feeling down, whether it's with depression or anxiety, the loss of a loved one, the news that we hold in our heart, struggles within our family or with a friend. And all of a sudden someone comes along and good things are happening. It's hard in that moment to be excited. Imagine that widow there, all of a sudden people coming in and saying, Jesus, here he is, look it. And her saying, look at me. I have just lost my only child, my only son. I'm not in the mood for your happiness, your joy. And what happens is Jesus steps into that place with compassion, with listening. I realized from our conversation this past week, none of us were going to fix the emotions that came out around the loss of a son, the recent diagnosis, or the challenges in life. But in allowing the space for people to talk and be open and vulnerable, a new community and new hope was forged. If only for that moment or that day. Jesus steps precisely into that place. And then he goes and lays his hand on the rear and on the son, inviting him to rise up from the dead. And it happens. In that moment, something happens where this procession of hope encounters despair and takes over, proclaiming that death will not have the final word, proclaiming that all of the anxiety and the despair that weighs on our shoulders, the fear, cannot hold it down. Certainly it will last for a day. But there is a promise that supersedes that calls us into new life, into wholeness, and into healing. Of course, the reality is, he's going to die again. And the mother is going to die. And we know along the way that as people who have read the story, that even Jesus, as the Christ, will die. Yet, even there, death and fear and despair does not have the final word. So today, as we hear this story, we are invited in to have our hearts broken open and to move from up here to here. And to experience this one who reaches out to touch those unclean, unholy places in our lives. Who reaches out to touch the places where we have felt the sting of death, the loss of a loved one, where we hold out our own flaws and foibles, our own challenges and brokenness. And for a moment, we allow that procession of hope to wash over us, to bring us healing and hope. as we come to this place today, we allow a holy time of healing in our congregation with the 3 stations and healing ministers who will sit and pray with you in silence or loud, who will anoint you. And we recognize in our tradition that science and medicine are significant, psychiatry and psychology, that oftentimes the things that are bothering us or weighing us down simply can't be washed away. But in that moment, there is someone who listens, filled with compassion. There is someone who gently reaches out a hand to say, you are not alone. There is a procession that greets us in all of the weight that is upon us and challenges us to live into hope, so that we can go back into the world being bearers of that life and of that witness to a world desperately in need of this grace, this love, and this hope. We will not let fear have the final word. We will not let despair have the final word. As followers of Jesus the Christ, we go forth boldly, wounded healers, for the sake of God's mercy and justice in the world. This day, may your life meet the procession of hope as you join the song and are sent forth into this world.